Welcome to Tech Lab by Sid. What is an API or Application Programming Interface? An API or Application Programming Interface is a set of defined rules, protocols, and tools that allow different software applications to communicate with each other. APIs allow different software systems to interact in a standardized way, enabling them to request data or services and share information without having to understand the internal workings of the other system. In simpler terms, an API acts as an intermediary that enables two applications to talk to each other. It provides a set of commands, functions, and protocols that allow one program to interact with another program or service, such as a database, web service, or operating system. Key concepts and terms related to API. Endpoint. An endpoint refers to a specific URL where an API can be accessed. It is the point at which a service or API is made available over the network. Endpoints are typically associated with HTTP methods like GET, POST, PUT, and DELETE. HTTP methods. These are the verbs used to indicate the action that is being requested from the server. GET, retrieve data from the server, example, fetch records. POST, send data to the server, example, create a new record. PUT, update data on the server, example, modify an existing record. Delete, remove data from the server. Request, a request is made by the client. It is usually a program or web application to the API to access specific data or resources. A request typically includes URL or Uniform Resource Locator, the address of the endpoint. HTTP method, what action to perform, get, post, etc. Headers, additional information sent with the request, such as authentication tokens or data format, JSON, XML. Body, in some cases, especially with POST or PUT requests, data sent to the API, such as user data or form input. Response, after the request is made, the API returns a response. This typically includes status code, a number indicating the success or failure of the request, example, 200 for success, 404 for not found, 500 for server error. Body. The actual data or information requested by the client, often in formats like JSON or XML. Headers, metadata about the response, such as content type and caching information. Authentication and authorization. API often require authentication to ensure that the person or system making the request has permission to access the resource. Common methods include API key, a unique identifier passed with each request. OAuth, an authorization protocol that allows users to grant limited access to their resources on one service to another service without sharing their credentials. Bearer token, a security token passed along with the API request for verification. Rate limiting. Rate limiting is the practice of controlling the amount of incoming requests to an API within a certain time frame. It helps prevent abuse, ensures fair usage, and protects the server from being overwhelmed with excessive requests. JSON or JavaScript Object Notation. JSON is the most commonly used data format in APIs, particularly for sending and receiving data between the client and the server. It is a lightweight and easy-to-read format that represents data structures in key value pairs. REST or Representational State Transfer. REST is an architectural style for designing networked applications. It uses simple HTTP methods to perform CRUD operations on resources, create, read, update, delete. RESTful APIs are stateless, meaning each request contains all the necessary information for the server to process it, and the server does not store client context between requests. SOAP, Simple Object Access Protocol. SOAP is a protocol for exchanging structured information in the implementation of web services. It uses XML for message formatting and typically operates over HTTP or SMTP. SOAP APIs are more rigid and require more overhead compared to REST APIs, but they are used in enterprise-level applications where security and transaction management are crucial. Webhooks. A webhook is a user-defined HTTP callback that allows one system to notify another system when a particular event occurs. Unlike an API request that a client initiates, webhooks push data to another system automatically when certain conditions are met. SDK, Software Development Kit. An SDK is a set of tools, libraries, and documentation provided by a service to help developers integrate and work with that service's API more efficiently. An SDK usually includes pre-built code, samples, and utilities that make it easier to interact with an API. Process of working with APIs. API design. Before using an API, the provider needs to design it. This involves defining the data format, example, JSON, XML, the structure of the endpoints, the operations or methods supported by each endpoint, how authentication and security will work, API consumption, or making API requests. As a developer or system that needs to use an API, you make a request to the API's endpoint by specifying the endpoint URL, the HTTP method, GET, POST, and etc. Any necessary parameters or data in the request body. Authentication credentials, if needed. Server processes the request. The server receives the request and processes it by checking the method, parameters, and credentials. If everything is valid, the server performs the requested action, example, fetch data from a database, create a resource, and prepares a response. API response. The server sends back a response containing a status code to indicate success or failure, the response body with the requested data or an error message, response headers with additional metadata like content type. Handle the response. The client application handles the response, either displaying the data to the user or performing further actions based on the API's response. Example of an API call. Imagine you want to retrieve a list of users from a web service API. Here's a simplified example of how this might work. API request. Client sends a GET request to the server. Server processes the request. The server checks if the provided access token is valid and that the user has permission to view the users. API response. Server responds with the data. Client processes the response. The client application parses the JSON response and displays the user data. To summarize, APIs are foundational to modern software development, enabling systems to communicate, share data, and integrate functionalities in a standardized way. Understanding the key components, processes, and terminology related to APIs is essential for building, using, or maintaining API-based systems. The role of APIs has grown tremendously, as they allow developers to leverage external services, like social media, payment systems, or databases, and integrate them into their own applications, vastly expanding the capabilities of any program or service. Thanks for watching the video.